Tonight, we're live at the Vatican after a day of high ceremony and deep emotion at the funeral of Pope Francis. Ritual in keeping with the Church's traditions, but with references to Pope Francis's personal humility in the presence of many of the world's most powerful leaders. But in a break with predecessors, Pope Francis's coffin was driven through Rome to the delight of tens of thousands of people to a final resting place away from the Vatican. Earlier in the Vatican, startling diplomacy, an extraordinary surprise meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, their first since their bitter White House row.
Also on the programme, Virginia Giuffre takes her own life, the woman who had accused Prince Andrew of sexual abuse. And for the fourth year in a row, Celtic are Scottish Premiership champions.
Good evening and welcome to the Vatican, where the funeral of Pope Francis, who led the Catholic Church for 12 years, has taken place. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered for the Mass, filling St. Peter's Square behind me and the surrounding streets. They included royalty and heads of state, but also people who were close to the Pope's heart, the homeless and refugees. Pope Francis's coffin was then carried on a white converted Pope-mobile to his favourite church in Rome, where he was laid to rest in a private ceremony. Before the funeral, Presidents Trump and Zelensky held a surprise meeting in St. Peter's Basilica. More on that in a moment, but first our religion editor, Aleem Makboul, reports on the funeral of Pope Francis.
St. Peter's. Named after the apostle considered by Catholics to be the first pope, the basilica's curved colonnades representing the open arms of an embrace. This was the spectacular backdrop for the farewell to the 266th pope. Inside the basilica, ahead of the funeral mass, a last chance for visiting dignitaries, including the Prince of Wales, to pay their respects. Sir Keir Starmer, one of dozens of world leaders in attendance. There was applause in the crowd when President Zelensky appeared. But by mid-morning, the invited guests took their seats. Clergy on the right looking out, politicians and sovereigns on the left. But other guests invited at Pope Francis' request included prison inmates, migrants and torture victims. On the streets around St. Peter's Square, 250,000 others waited. And then, to start proceedings, the body of Pope Francis was brought through the basilica. In the coffin with him, his mitre or papal hat, his pastoral staff or crozier, and a scroll, a written record of his life and pontificate. There was gentle, spontaneous applause through the huge crowds as the coffin emerged into the light. Its 14 pallbearers taking it to the front of this breathtaking arena. Presenting it to the world, but not on a platform, Pope Francis had asked that his coffin be placed on the ground.
Dominus pascit me, et nihil mihi derit.
Although elements of the funeral have been simplified following instructions left by Pope Francis himself, the magnitude of the moment is still reflected in the ritual and tradition and spectacle on this stunning stage. It was 91-year-old Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re who presided over the Mass and delivered the homily, reflecting on the things Pope Francis cared about: his opposition to war, his passion for the environment and for the dignity of migrants. He mentioned some notable papal trips. It is significant that Pope Francis' first journey was to Lampedusa, he says, an island that symbolises the tragedy of migration, with thousands of people drowning at sea, as well as the celebration of a Mass on the border between Mexico and the United States. At talk of these causes, the crowd applauded, though there may have been discomfort for some politicians. At the end of the Mass, there was a final blessing for Pope Francis. But he wasn't going to be buried at St. Peter's like other popes, but would instead be taken in a converted Pope-mobile to his favourite spot at a different basilica in the centre of Rome. More than 150,000 people lined the streets to say goodbye, a nod to the connection he had to the masses. At the Pope's destination, a group of people from homeless centres waited to welcome him. So too did the clergy who'd participate in the final part of today's ceremonies. Away from the gaze of the public, the late Pope was laid to rest in a tomb inscribed with just one word, the Latin version of his chosen name, Franciscus.
Aleem Maqbool reporting there. Well, before the funeral, President Zelensky and President Trump held a brief meeting in the Vatican, their first since February's bad-tempered exchange at the White House. It was described by both sides as constructive. President Zelensky also met Sir Keir Starmer and the French President Emmanuel Macron, who said that Ukraine is ready for an unconditional ceasefire. Joe Inwood explains now the diplomacy that took place on the sidelines.
Even on a day that was supposed to be above politics, some was unavoidable. President Zelensky and Trump having a brief meeting before the funeral of Pope Francis. The pictures were published on social media by the White House without any sound. But afterwards, Ukraine's president struck a positive, if cautious note.
So it's about how to bring peace closer and how was resultative, positive Paris and London. And we want to continue such meetings to bring peace to Ukraine.
You're gambling with World War III.
It was certainly more good-tempered than the last time the two men met. This now infamous clash in the White House preceded a pause of US military and intelligence support, with severe consequences for Ukraine.
How are you, Mr. President?
Since then, the US has increased its engagement with Russia, most recently when Special Envoy Steve Witkoff met President Putin yesterday. Shortly after that, President Trump said Russia and Ukraine were very close to a deal. But in the last few hours, he posted on social media, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently. President Zelensky said today's meeting, on the sidelines of the funeral of a pope who had always called for peace, had the potential to be historic. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Let's get a final word now from Aleem Maqbool. Aleem, an extraordinary day here today in Rome. Things will turn shortly to the finding of a successor to Pope Francis, but first of all, what a day we've witnessed.
What grandeur, what poignancy, the sights, the sounds of the Sistine Chapel choir. But for me, a lot of what stood out was the way in which the public interacted in this funeral. He was, after all, a man who had a profound connection with the public. So there's moments when the crowds here cheered. Themes that the Pope Francis cared about were mentioned in the homily. The way they lined the streets, the groups he invited to be guests in the funeral, and those who greeted him at the basilica where he was buried. But Now there is the start of an official 9 days of mourning, after which, yes, there will be the conclave where 135 cardinals get together and decide Pope Francis' successor. That's not to say some of those conversations aren't already happening around Rome as we speak, dinners and coffees and so on. But for today, I think for most people here, from what they were telling us, this has been a moment to celebrate, to give thanks, and to remember the life and legacy of Pope Francis.
Thank you very much. Alim Makbul, our religion editor. That's it from us for now. Now back to Laxmi in the studio.
Rita, thank you. Virginia Giuffre, who accused Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein of sexual abuse, has died. Her family said she took her own life at home in Australia. She alleged she was trafficked to the Duke of York by Epstein when she was 17 years old. Prince Andrew has always denied the claim. Our Australia correspondent Katie Watson is in the rural area outside Perth where Ms Giuffre lived. Katie.
We're outside Virginia Giuffre's farm, which is about an hour north of Perth. Now, it was here on Friday night that police responded to reports of a woman who'd been found unresponsive. It was here that she was declared dead just a while later. Now, this is a rural area. The nearby village has just a few hundred people. It's a very different life she led here to the one in the US, and of course, later when she was thrust into the spotlight after accusations against Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew.
And I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced.
Virginia Giuffre was one of the most prominent accusers of Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced US financier accused of running a vast sex trafficking network. Giuffre claimed she was trafficked by him and forced to have sex with the Duke of York. This photo of them together, now infamous. Prince Andrew, though, has always denied the accusations. He reached an out-of-court settlement with her in 2022 that contained no admission of liability or apology. In an interview with the BBC's Panorama 3 years earlier, she said she stood by the accusations.
He knows what happened. I know what happened. And there's only one of us telling the truth.
In a statement, her family said Virginia was a fierce warrior in the fight against sexual abuse and sex trafficking. She was the light that lifted so many survivors. But her family also acknowledged that in the end, the toll of abuse became so heavy and unbearable. We know that she's with the angels. Born in the US, Virginia Giuffre in recent years moved close to Perth with her Australian husband and children. It's understood she was living at this farm in the town of Neergaby after her 22-year marriage broke down. She recently talked about the challenges in her life on social media. Just a few weeks ago, she posted this update saying she'd been seriously injured in a car accident and had just a few days to live. Her family later said she hadn't intended to make that public. Local police also disputed the severity of the crash. Separately, it emerged that she was facing court after allegedly breaching a family violence restraining order over an incident in Perth in February. An advocate for survivors of sex trafficking, dead at just 41, Virginia Giuffre was outspoken until the very end. Katie Watson, BBC News in Western Australia.
Iranian state media says at least 8 people have been killed in a huge explosion at a port in the southern city of Bandar Abbas. The moment of the blast at the Shahid Raji port was caught on camera. Reports say the fire has intensified and could spread further. More than 750 people have been injured. Hamas says it's open to an agreement with Israel to end the Gaza war that would include the release of all the remaining hostages. A Hamas spokesman told the BBC that the proposal would envisage a truce lasting between 5 and 7 years. A delegation is in Cairo for talks with Egyptian mediators to try to find ways to end the 18-month-long war. In football, Celtic have retained the Scottish Premiership title. They only needed a draw at Dundee United, but were comfortable winners and will now look to win the treble for the second year running. Ben Croucher reports.
Another title firmly rubber-stamped by Celtic.
55 titles, 4 in a row, a 5-0 win to crown it. Celtic's numbers speak for themselves. As for the game that sealed it, start counting. An own goal had already given Celtic the lead at Dundee United before Nicholas Kuhn doubled it.
And Nicholas Kuhn arrives!
By half-time, Kuhn had 2, Celtic had 3, Brendan Rodgers was buzzing. Promise. Ademida added a 4th and a 5th, a season with more ups than downs, ending with a 13th title in 14 years.
It's a remarkable statistic. It feels like it's been normalised when it really isn't. It's such a hard thing to do.
It's Rodgers' 11th trophy as Celtic boss. More could still follow. Back at Celtic Park, it's all about that winning feeling, and that's what really counts. Ben Croucher, BBC News.
Now let's return to Rita at the Vatican.
Lakshmi, thank you. Well, while Pope Francis's funeral was simpler than that of those of his predecessors, it was still a spectacle of ceremony and tradition under the bright blue skies in Rome. We'll leave you with a few images of this morning's events. Good night.